So then something else happened, but not until 2004, and that is that it turned out that the study had some problems. Problems both in the technical way it was carried out and in Wakefield's own motivations for the study. So through the investigative work of a journalist, Brian Deere, who worked for the London Times, he found that Andrew Wakefield had been funded for this study by solicitors, lawyers, who were seeking evidence to use against vaccine manufacturers. And Wakefield's co-authors weren't aware of the fact that his funding was coming from these lawyers. The Lancet itself said, according to Brian Deere, that the finding linking MMR to autism was, based on what this investigation revealed, that the finding was entirely flawed and should never have been published. But you couldn't really go back and undo that. A number of other things that Brian Deere found. One was through equivalent of Freedom of Information Act request. He found earlier drafts of the paper where the data had been altered to make it look like the time of onset of autism was even closer to the time of the vaccine than it really was. Perhaps the scientifically most questionable thing that came out was that the 12 children, there are only 12 children, remember, the 12 children were not a random sample. In the paper, it sounded like they were. There was 12 children who were consecutively referred to the Department of Pediatric Gastroenterology. It turned out the 12 children were all clients through their parents of this UK solicitor. This is Brian Deere's wording, the small-time UK solicitor, who was trying to raise a speculative lawsuit. This is the same lawyer who was funding the work. So the children were not a random sample. In fact, they were chosen by this lawyer because their autism symptoms had appeared soon after getting the vaccines. In addition, Wakefield and the hospital he worked for had applied for not one but 2 patents for what they called a safer measles vaccine, another motivation for them to perhaps that would bias their study. And through Brian Deere's investigation, it turns out that he found out that not only was the study funded by these lawyers, but he personally was being paid as a consultant by these lawyers. And in the end, through Deere's investigation, it turned out he got approximately $750,000 over the course of several years. And his work for the lawyers began 2 years before the publication, so it started at least as early as 1996. So when this all came out in 1994, his co-authors, who were quite shocked to find all this out, retracted the findings. This is actually not all the co-authors. 10 of the 12 co-authors retracted them. 2 of the authors stuck by Wakefield, and as far as I know, still are standing by him. But 10 of the 12 co-authors published this article in 2004 in the Lancet, retracting the interpretation. It didn't retract the entire study, but they specifically retracted the link between MMR and MMR vaccine and autism. The Lancet also published 2 editorials. This is one of them on the lessons of MMR, where they said, it seems obvious now that if we'd appreciated the full context in which work reported in 1998 was done, they wouldn't have published this in the first place. Wakefield was given the opportunity to respond, and he wrote a commentary responding to those criticisms where he didn't back down at all. He basically stuck to his guns. This is just a tiny excerpt from this lengthy commentary he wrote, where he said all the things they were alleging. Well, he didn't actually rebut all of them, but he attempted to rebut some of the allegations against him. And then he gave this final statement: my colleagues and I have acted at all times in the best medical interest of these children and will continue to do so. And I just want to point this out because this is a very common theme I've seen from Wakefield and from others like him. They always say, well, we're just trying to do the best thing for the children. We're listening to the parents. These other people aren't really doing that, or they don't understand. And there are many patients of Wakefield who believe him. They think he really is sincerely trying to do the best thing, and perhaps he is, but it's not logically, it doesn't follow that just because you're trying to do the best thing that you are doing the best thing. So Wakefield was because of all this, he was forced out of his job. This is from the Daily Express in London, 2006. It said he was forced out of his job at London's Royal Free Hospital in 2001, and he moved to the US and established something called Thoughtful House Center for Children. This is a flyer for a talk he gave at Carnegie Mellon University in 2005 that I found, where he's talking about the origins of the autism epidemic. I'm going to come back to this a little later and talk about whether there is, in fact, an autism epidemic or not. And the origins, as you can imagine, according to Wakefield, when he gives this talk, the origins are the vaccine. So he's continuing to push this connection. And if you read the description, this is from that same poster, you read about him, and if you don't know this history, and why would you if you didn't dig into it, if you're just thinking of going to the talk, you'll see, well, he's got all these degrees. He's an academic gastroenterologist who has gained international recognition as an authority on autism. He's published over 132 scientific articles, book chapters, and so on. So it sounds like this guy really knows his stuff. And you see this on a poster for Carnegie Mellon University, you have no reason not to believe it. But Wakefield is still pushing the MMR to autism link. That was in 2005. He's still doing it now. Just want to quickly show you a couple of press releases. This is the website of his center, Thoughtful House in Texas. And they have, as well as offering clinical services, they also have editorials. Here's an editorial, and this title is the title of a paper. The editorial was a commentary on this paper. The paper's title is No Effect of MMR Withdrawal on the Incidence of Autism. It was done in Japan. And the conclusions of the paper itself of the authors were this. The significance of this finding is that MMR vaccination is most unlikely to be a main cause of ASD. That's autism spectrum disorder, which is how it's called nowadays. That it cannot explain the rise over time in the incidence of ASD, and that withdrawal of MMR vaccine cannot be expected to lead to reduction in the incidence of ASD. Pretty explicit. MMR vaccine not linked to autism. Wakefields Commentary says, Japanese study is the strongest evidence yet for a link between MMR and autism. It's kind of, you read that and you think, how could he possibly do that, possibly say that? And if you read the commentary, which I've done, it's just an attempt to try to grasp on a couple of details of the study and show that somehow they're not inconsistent with what Wakefield's been pushing all along. So when I see this sort of commentary, I think he probably truly believes what he's saying. Wakefield probably truly believes what he's saying, but I think he just doesn't understand, even though he's got all these degrees, he doesn't seem to understand these very clear epidemiological studies, which seem to contradict that. They also had another press release, one other press release from the Thoughtful House site based on this study, and this is a study looking at autism and asking, is there a regressive phenotype of autism, a particular type of autism where the children gain language and then they get worse? It's called regressive autism. Is that associated with MMR vaccine? The authors concluded no, that their study provides no evidence that regression in autism is associated with a vaccine. The press release from Thoughtful House on this study says, study identifies association between pattern of MMR exposure and regressive autism. Again, the exact opposite of what the study showed. And so it's really kind of stunning, but if you just go to Thoughtful House and you read the commentary, you probably won't go and read the study. You'll probably say, okay, well, if you already have been sold on what Wakefield is pushing, you'll read his commentaries and think, oh, look, there's studies coming out continuing to support what he's proposing as a link between MMR and autism.